Hello, everybody. I wanted to make a quick video today. I'm still traveling a lot, so I'm going to be all over the place. Right now, it looks like I'm at the beach. And I wanted to just make a video series that focuses a little bit, not so much on in-depth guides to Tactica or designs for your list, but focuses instead on individual units in the game that I think are either very interesting or are very powerful, and talk a little bit about why they are powerful. And this was prompted because a friend of mine recently asked me about Nurglings. Now, if you know me, Nurglings are a unit that I think are among my more common choices. They're something I'm known for. Even in 8th edition, when I was playing competitively at the time, I would always bring a 9 base unit of Nurglings to every game that I played. And it wasn't just an enjoyment of them in terms of the lore or how goofy they were. These are all good things that they have going for them. But the reason I always would go back to that, and the reason my inevitable best in faction run at the Las Vegas Open included that 9-man brick even after they had gone up considerably in points, was because they do things that few other units can do. And more than almost anything in the game, I think they've mastered the art of nothing. Chess and 40K are very different games. There's a lot that you cannot compare between the two. But I oftentimes, when I'm thinking about the strategy for units, use chess as a very good example. Part of the reason for this is the theory in the game of chess is very clearly defined. Openers are known, defenses are known, and pieces are equivalent between both players. So with so much information that exists in the world of chess about different ways in which you can open your game, there's few more popular or famous than White's classic opener of moving a single pawn to either d4 or e4 directly in front of their line. The reason this is the first play for most players in chess, especially in a basic game, is because it's a very active play. You immediately are gaining control of the center of the board, and that allows you to control a lot of the action early. It's also very flexible, and it allows you to have space to get your bishops active or to defend your pawn with your horse pieces very quickly. It's just overall a very active position, and it's hard for your opponent to find any flaw in it. A lot of the responses from the player who goes second using the black pieces often revolve around creating better defenses to prevent you from doing something rather than to do something themselves. The reason this play is so effective is because it creates a circumstance where you immediately have control of the tempo of the game, and it's up to your opponent to take that tempo from you. So in that same way, when I was asked about Nurglings, my response was to liken them a little bit to pawns. They are the pawns in my list. They're the thing that does something incredibly important for setting the tempo of the game, but they're not the crux of my power. They're not the thing I defend myself or my castle with. But that's not to say they're a throwaway piece either. This is a common mistake. When I talk a lot about Nurglings, one of the other responses I get is when I bring those to games, they often just die, and I don't feel like I get anything for them. Well, part of that comes down to the concept of the pawn is not a piece you throw away. It's actually a piece you defend. Going back to the chess example, once I've moved my pawn into the middle, I'm getting my other pieces active and I'm defending that pawn. My pawn structure is really important. The way I set them on the board enables me to either defend or attack against my opponent. And the Nurgling is the same way. It's a unit you move onto the board into a position immediately as they have a pre-game deployment. It's almost like you are, even if going second, gaining the first move in a game of chess, because you're setting the tempo of the game based on where that unit is set. If you put it directly in front of your opponent and you're hoping for a turn 1 coin flip win against them, so that you can get them immediately in their face or use them for some direct move blocking on the first turn, it's a legitimate style to play, but it's a risky style. It's a gambit. You also, and this is the more common way that I've used them, use their forward deploy mechanic to place them somewhere where I can defend them, or I can punish my opponent if they overcommit. And that's kind of the idea of them. They're a pawn, but that doesn't mean they're a throwaway piece. They're a piece that you defend, and they're a piece that helps create tempo in the game. A lot of my current lists have 2 small units of 3 to 4 bases of Nurglings. And the reason for this is because I can forward deploy them on most Warhammer missions, I'm able to immediately gain control of objectives on the center of the board. Now, Nurglings aren't objective secured any longer. And because of that, it's very easy for your opponent to move up, tap that objective, and steal it from you. But the fact of the matter is, you make them have to do that. You make your opponent have to play for those objectives. Otherwise, they're conceding them for this incredibly cheap throwaway unit. So that's what I like about the Nurgling. It creates tempo in the game. It doesn't do anything per se. It just sits there. But because it does it so well, it forces action. So when I set my Nurglings up on the board, I'm looking at ways that I can defend them. I'm evaluating what units could move to get line of sight to shoot them. What units could make an easy charge into them? Can they survive that charge? If so, what does my response look like? And as I'm planning this out, I probably put more individual thought into where I place the Nurglings than any other unit during my deployment phase. I'm evaluating the threats that my opponent can position against me. And I am trying to make the best and most controllable possible move to get the game state that I prefer. There's some examples of this. So just in the same way that in a game of chess, I might move my piece on E to the 4th space in an active position at the center of the board, I can also build a castle around my Nurglings, especially for bringing larger units of them. And when you build your castle, what you're wanting to do is find a position that is difficult to shoot, but maybe not impossible to charge, and set them up so that they're about halfway up the board. The idea here is that, yes, my opponent could move units into charge range, especially if they have a good number of charge threats. However, if they do charge me, after that charge and that pile-in, my opponent's going to be significantly closer to me. So I want pieces that will do something to them, trade for material or trade for position against them when they do that. So that's why I'll include things like bloodletters or demonettes in my list. It's a quick moving threat that can go up and counterpunch those units that do charge into the Nurgling line. It's making my charges easier in exchange for that unit. Alternatively, if they don't have those good threats, something that can't rip apart a 4-base Nurgling or 9-base Nurgling Scrod right away, and they're a shooting-oriented army, they become very irritating to deal with. They force their threats, their guns, to actually move up the table to create those lines. Otherwise, I'm just gaining the center. And even though we don't have things like objective secured on our Nurglings, we can use them to defend things that do. Blocking off passages or arteries our opponent might move their pieces through to fire at us. I think of this as a very defensive way to use them, putting them back behind terrain, hiding and protecting them as if they were as important as that pawn in the game of chess. I am moving my demon princes or my greater demons into better positions in order to defend that Nurgling unit or to give it more value. And yes, they might be able to quickly flip an objective on a squad of Nurglings itself. And maybe I don't even have an objective secured unit. I can reasonably get into the position to keep that objective from them. But the mere fact that they had to move it on there gives me the opportunity to punch it and push it off, and yet still have a unit there for myself, using things like flamers to drop in out of manifestation and shoot the opposing unit off the objective. So when it goes back to their scoring phase, at the end of their command phase, I still hold it because I have a Nurgling base there. But it goes farther. There's a lot of theory here in high variance matchups where I feel like I'm not favored, and they have a large number of difficult to move but dangerous models. An example would be something like the Leagues of Votan New Land Fortress, or in the example of Knights. I'm trying to set up my Nurglings in a way where I know that they're going to die, but they're going to make it very difficult for my opponent to move their base or their model into any position that is going to get an angle on more important units. So that's the example of when they do kind of become somewhat of a gambit or a throwaway piece. But I'm throwing them away not for the potential of some high variance charge play on the first turn. I'm throwing them away in exchange to continue to keep that tempo. I'm making the first move in the game of chess. They have responded, and now it goes back to me. And I'm able to know that I've stuck them more or less close to their deployment zone and away from those key objectives so that I can hold them for at least one more turn and deny my opponent points. So I think it's precisely the fact that while, yes, people often tell me the Nurgling unit does nothing or it's a useless waste of your points, especially once you start bringing them in larger squads of 9. It's cost them 180 points that could be better spent on other things. I have to counter with, well, yes, they do nothing, but they do nothing incredibly well.